By a narrow vote of 33 to 27, the Senate was able to pass a bill yesterday that repeals parts of the law known as last in, first out, which protects the most tenured teachers from layoffs. Now, as you can imagine, the state's largest teachers union is not happy with this vote. Steve Allinger is the legislative director for NYSUT. He joins me in the studio to talk more about this. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
You guys actually, teachers in general, have moved to sort of public enemy #1 status this year. It's unusual that you're under attack from all over the place.
Well, we think the attacks are coming from wealthy hedge fund managers and ideological groups like Education Reform Now that are essentially phony groups, you know, maybe a handful of billionaire Wall Street executives who can buy ads and pretend there's a groundswell of attacks on teachers. But actually we're very heartened because the Quinnipiac poll showed 79% of New Yorkers reject cuts to education. Other polls, 76%. There are 2/3 of New Yorkers believe that it's foolish to give tax breaks to billionaires and millionaires while you're cutting education to the bone.
Yeah, but when you talk about polling, however, there was also a recent poll that said 85% of New Yorkers support the idea of having a merit-based system instead of a seniority-based system when it comes to evaluating teachers for layoffs, no?
We also know that, that the public supports collective bargaining rights. That came out in the New York Times poll.
Yep.
And what we saw this week was a hastily written bill riddled with inconsistencies and subjective issues at a time when we had negotiated just this past June a groundbreaking teacher evaluation process that won us the largest Race to the Top award in the United States,
right.
$750 million on the strength of the proposal.
So it's not that the teachers union is completely adverse to the idea of changing the way that teachers are evaluated. Is that right?
That's correct. We want a fair and objective system that really focuses on the practices that make for successful teachers, and that look at what teachers bring to the classroom and how they've moved kids over time. And we have been a faithful partner with people of goodwill, and sometimes we disagree, but we work out our disagreements. And we're proud of the work we've done with the Board of Regents, the Commissioner, the Executive, the Legislature, and that work was lauded. The U.S. Ed Secretary visited our headquarters
right.
to praise
Arne Duncan,
the work we were involved in.
Do you believe, I mean, here's something that happened yesterday when I mentioned this Senate bill, which of course NYSUT opposes, and as does UFT, which is the New York City union. It is a bill that specifically only addressed New York City. It was not a bill, there was a push to try and get some of the upstate districts also involved, and John Flanagan, the senator who carried the bill, did not include that. So it was a New York City bill. And Mayor Bloomberg was infuriated when Governor Cuomo, right after this bill passed, announced that he would put in his own program bill to create basically a statewide teacher evaluation system, much along the same lines of expanding what you're talking about, which is the effort to create a different system through the Race to the Top funding, or the Race to the Top award that the state received. The Bloomberg administration accused the Cuomo administration of selling out to the teachers union to get you in some way to back down on his spending cuts. Do you believe that that is possible?
It sounds like a shaggy dog story. You know, I can't decipher what the mayor is getting at. We worked out a fair and objective system and process for teacher evaluation that he lauded. He also said, I got to have it right now, even though the process is midstream and we're still working to get a complete system in place, one that he has said should be supported. So his comments are completely contradictory. Furthermore, earlier he expressed distress that the state was cutting aid to education for New York City. He felt that it was reneging on the commitment on the Campaign for Fiscal Equity
Right.
to provide fair funding. And this appears to be just a huge distraction and throwing sand in the air. And the fact of the matter is that our United Federation of Teachers have worked out new agreements just last year to expedite teacher disciplinary procedures, and he lauded those. So this, this just seems like a temper tantrum to us, and taking the focus off fighting to get fair funding and stave off devastating cuts in programs to kids.
Well, just to put it a different way, though, UFT President Michael Mulgrew was quoted as saying that the thing that the program, which we've not yet seen the bill for, but what the governor is proposing is vastly preferable to the bill, that the LIFO bill, as we've been calling it, that was passed by the Senate, that doesn't look like it's going anywhere in the Assembly, just to be clear. However, could you see some way that in exchange for the governor's bill, that that NYSUT and UFT would stand down on their opposition to the largest, if I'm not mistaken, education cut coming on the heels of the other historic largest education cut, which
that would
happened
be
last
unethical.
time?
We have to. We're not trading due process and fairness and 100 years of labor law protection in selling out our schools. We need adequate funding to provide the education to meet the highly qualified standards that have been set by the state. The president, governor, legislature has challenged us to close the achievement gap, which Education Week said we were #1 in the country in making progress. We can't do this without resources, and we're not going to cut our throats on giving teachers the tools they need to teach to high standards and children to learn to high standards.
But doesn't New York already spend the highest per pupil in the nation on
It's
students?
among the highest, but it's also the highest cost state. Lawyers, doctors, other professionals have average high salaries in the New York metro area. And having represented the city in the past, I remember the dark days, and they went on for a long time, when you could not get qualified, certified teachers, even in elementary school, Common Branch area. You couldn't get it in science, math. That went on into the early 2000s. So when you fail to meet the market rate for highly trained professionals, the kids pay the price in not getting the qualified teachers they need. And that was particularly true in New York City, where Commissioner Mills sued the New York City schools for failing to recruit and retain qualified teachers.
Does the union have a position when the governor says, in order to try and make these cuts, schools should actually consider capping their highly paid administrators? He wants to have a superintendent's salary cap. Is that something that the unions feel is a good idea, or not something that you're weighing in on at this point?
I don't think we think it's a terribly good idea to just take a snapshot and freeze wherever superintendents are at any given point, because having good leadership is important. We also think we should focus on adequate funding of schools. The amount of money saved is very small. We're facing a $1.5 billion cut, a record cut.
It's $15 million. It's not very much.
That's against $1.5 billion and almost $3 billion in promises not kept to fund particularly needy schools to close the achievement gap. And we'd like to work with the governor and the legislature to find a better way. Continue the high-end income tax. Doesn't make sense to do $5+ billion of tax cuts to the very wealthy on top of the extension of the Bush income tax for the wealthy. $8 billion in federal tax breaks to the wealthiest New Yorkers, an average $124,000 for the top 2 or 3%. And on top of that, we would do a windfall tax break same for our universities and colleges.
Well, that ties in a little bit to something that you said at the beginning of this interview, which is that there is a push to fund some of this anti-union sentiment, if you will, not necessarily in New York, but in Wisconsin by David Koch, for example, who's been funding the Tea
Right.
Partiers. Here, when you talk about education reform now, you're talking about an entity that I believe has been funded in a large part by hedge fund money.
Gotham Capital, another, there was an article, I think in the Daily News blog, that was very comprehensive and showed who the funders are.
Right.
And it's cynical checkbook politics. You know, we're a transparent organization. We represent over 600,000 members. Everything we do is disclosed.
Well, but the unions don't exactly not have enough money to put on ads, for example. I mean, there's an ad campaign that's running right now.
Yeah. Yes, and it's funded through voluntary contributions of 140,000 members who give on average $40-odd. Not by a handful of individuals who take windfall profits that they got because of taxpayer bailouts to fund their ideological hobby horses.
Before I let you go, I also want to ask you, there's sort of a new front in this fight, if you will. The mandate relief report came out yesterday, and there is a proposed creation of a sixth tier in the pension fund. This is not something that NYSET supports. There was a sort of joint statement that came out between NYSET and CSEA, the State Workers Union. You disavowed this, all preliminary recommendations of this report.
In the first meeting, which I think was public and video streamed, we made it crystal clear the ink's barely dry on Tier 5. These were tough negotiations. We made concessions worth collectively $35 billion in reductions in pensions for local, and it doesn't save districts a dime.
Will
to go to
the
Tier 6.
unions at some point, the teachers' unions, be willing to make more concessions? I understand the argument that you've just conceded to create Tier 5, but what about going forward?
Well, then it becomes a race to the bottom. When entered into these negotiations in good faith, they were for long-term savings, and they were very carefully calibrated. And we were being pushed to achieve an extremely large goal. $35 billion is a very large number. And in addition to that, a lot of our locals, for instance, UFT, made $300 million in health insurance concessions. We've had over 100 locals renegotiate contracts. So where would it end? Tier 7, Tier 8? At a certain point, what we need is retirement security for all New Yorkers, not just for our members. Because if we fail to do that, you wind up paying someplace else in social service costs, in funding the indigent. The retirement system is a tremendous bargain for New Yorkers. 84% of the fund was achieved through earnings, through pooled investments, and a 401k would be half. It has half the value of a defined benefit. The controller has spoken very forcefully about both the efficiency and the value of the pension fund.
Well, this is hardly over. I think this is the first salvo, or the first several salvos that we're seeing in a fight over education and benefits and teachers. I want to thank you. In the meantime, we'll, of course, be weighing in with NYSET again. Mr. Allinger, thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.